Welcome to Leaders and Readers, a new podcast by the Pickering Public Library about readers and books. My name is Jackie Flowers. I'm the CEO of the Pickering Public Library, and each episode we will be sitting down with a leader in our community to talk about what they're reading. I'm thrilled to be joined today by City of Pickering Mayor Dave Ryan. For anyone not familiar with Mayor Ryan's impressive record of civic duty, he has been an elected official with the City of Pickering for 28 years, serving as mayor for the last 19. And at the end of this term, he will retire and earn the impressive title as longest-serving mayor of the City of Pickering. Mayor Ryan, it's a thrill. We're thrilled to have you here today. We're going to get into some of the books that you selected for us to talk about today. We're going to get to know you as a reader, get to know more about you as a leader. And so before we get into talking about any of the books, let me just let our audience know what books you selected for today's podcast. We have Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn, and The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson. So, without further ado, let's meet Mayor Ryan, the reader. How would you describe yourself as a reader?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity and for being here. It's a pleasure. And, I've always been a reader ever since I was a kid. My fondest memories as a youngster were going to the St. Clair Library. And some people may recognize it. It was the one that was, I guess about a year, maybe 2 years ago now, featured in an article in the Toronto Star. It had just been renovated, and they had uncovered the mural that was on the ceiling.
Oh, really?
And interestingly enough, that mural depicted the colonization, as we now know it, of the Indigenous peoples, and it was pictures of the Indigenous peoples and white settlers around the lake, and that mural is still on the ceiling of the St. Clair Library.
Wow!
So that was just some interesting that given the first book we're going to talk about. But my reading experience, I think like a lot of people, when I was particularly younger, I used to read to escape. You go into those places that the book was depicting, describing, the stories, the people, experiences different than your own. And then as you mature as a reader, I think, you become more interested in the ideas and the philosophies, if you will, and the characters of the people and what they're really representing. And that helps shape, in many ways, your thinking. Certainly has mine over the years. So I would describe myself now as an eclectic leader. I really enjoy, as you're seeing from the books that we've selected, I enjoy historical fiction. And because I enjoy history, I've read a lot of history, and I enjoy a good story around that history that brings it to life.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think it's a good segue for us to jump into the first book that you selected for us. I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about what this book is about in case they haven't had a chance to read it themselves. So the first book we're going to talk about is Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. This is a book that really centers around a horrific period in Canadian history and the residential school system. So in this book of fiction, we actually have 5 characters whose story weaves together. They were all brought to a residential school in BC sometime in the 1950s. We meet the characters when they're just children, being taken from their parents by RCMP officers. We experience some of the abuse that they suffer in the residential schools. And then we see how they transition out of residential schools, settling into parts of Vancouver and trying to really rebuild a life for themselves, dealing with the trauma that they experienced, on trying to understand their Indigenous heritage and identity, based on how difficult it would be to maintain that coming out of residential schools, and then really building a life and learning to love and finding meaningful work, and then one character even participates in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there's a lot in this book for sure that readers have to contend with. There's a lot of difficult subject matter in this book. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about why this book kind of jumped off the shelf for you. Why did you pick this book up in the first place?
Well, it's coincidental that we're filming this today or having this conversation today, the day before the Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And I think, like a lot of people, I didn't know about the residential school system. It's not something that obviously was publicized or in any way. Certainly wasn't in the history materials that I was familiar with. Didn't learn about it in school. And all of a sudden we were hit with Kamloops and those graves that were found. And so I was compelled to find things, and this was actually recommended to me by my granddaughter, my 15-year-old granddaughter, who is very much into the discussion around the indigenous abuses that have occurred through our history. And she said, "Granddad, try that." So I did. And as you say, it's in many ways a disturbing book. It's certainly informative. And I think it brings to life through these individuals something that we just weren't aware of, and we really do. All of us need to become aware of that, and we're going to respond to it individually in our own ways, but we need to educate ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to read a quote from the author, Michelle Good. When talking about this book, she said, "It occurred to me that this needed to be told as a story, as something that people could engage in, with more ease than a factual diatribe." So as a reader, did you find the fact that this was written obviously full of history and truth and fact, did you find this format of reading about residential schools in a fiction format to be more accessible or more meaningful?
Yeah, very, very much so, and that's the point. I mean, we're being bombarded, if that's the right word, through the media, largely, with the reality of what has occurred. But it's presented in facts and figures. It's presented in stark images, in 3-minute clips, and but to actually read the perspective of a character that Michelle Good, if you read her the cover, she is her family experienced the residential schools firsthand. So I'm convinced that many of the characters that we are meeting in her book are a composite of people that she knows one way or another or has been told about. So to actually have those experiences presented to us in a live form, and the results of those experiences and the intergenerational experience. And I think that's something that's difficult, and even reading it, it continues to be difficult for us who have not experienced it firsthand to really understand what is generational, what is that intergenerational experience, and how does it really manifest itself? Why does it really manifest itself? You think, well, that happened to my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And but it's there within us, it's within the family history, and it manifests itself in various ways.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's 5 characters really this whole story centers around: Maisie, Lucy, Clara, Howie, and Kenny. Was there any character that stood out for you, or really kind of you feel is one of those characters that will live with you out of the 5? I mean, I know they're all very powerful characters, but was there one in particular whose story?
As you said, they're all very powerful, and it's difficult to select one. But what's the first word that pops into your head? It's Maisie. Maisie, for those who haven't read the book, is a survivor. She was known in school as the strong one. She was the one that stood up. She left the school at 16 because that's what they did. They pushed you out the door at 16 with virtually no life skills beyond the 4 walls of the residential school. The minimum amount of money to get you started and pointed you in the direction of Vancouver. She did suffer psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. When another character, Lucy, also leaves the school at 16, put on that bus to Vancouver, she goes to Maisie because she knows that Maisie is the one that's made it. Right?
That's right.
And when she gets there, Maisie, of course, welcomes her, shows her around, gets her started, but at the same time, Maisie can't have her around. for any period of time. Maisie has to get away, and we discover the reason Maisie needs to get away is because she, in fact, has a very hidden part of her life where she actually seeks out abuse. And the abuse that she seeks is a recreation of the abuse that she suffered at the hands of a priest.
Yeah.
And this is something that recurs often for her. And shortly after she gets Lucy up and on her own, she actually commits suicide.
Yeah.
And because she can't live with it anymore.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's an extremely difficult character to meet and then lose so quickly because, she was, as you say, at the age of 16, each of the characters were sort of put on a bus, sent into Vancouver, where if they were lucky, they had a friend. But for the most part, they were not connected to their family anymore. They were not reunited with their family and their support networks. They had to figure out how to set up a whole brand new life in Vancouver. And some of when Lucy first gets to Vancouver, she's almost immediately, she steps off the bus into a dangerous situation. And she's just so fortunate, that she eventually has the strength to break out of that situation and go back, find Maisie, who gets her sort of situated in a safe way. But the sort of dangers that just existed in a big city like Vancouver at that time were tremendous for someone who would have grown up in a more isolated setting and then at the residential school. You're being dropped into there's such culture shock.
It would be daunting for anybody, but you take an individual that has suffered all of the abuses that we just talked about, and to put them in that environment without any real life skills beyond the residential school, I don't know how anybody would have survived it. I think the other thing that's interesting here in this book, and one of the reasons that Maisie stands out for me beyond what I've already said, is that in the book, she is the first person to speak in the first person.
Oh, interesting. I didn't catch that.
The rest of the characters, for the most part, are spoken of in the third person, but she speaks in the first person. And then later on, without giving too much away, one of the other characters dies. And throughout the book, that character is spoken in the third person until their death. And it's in their death that they speak in the first person. And I thought that was, it was an interesting, I'm sure that it was done intentionally. I'm trying to, so what was the intention of the author in taking those two characters in particular? There's a third character that in part of their narrative speaks in the first person. And again, when that character speaks in the first person, they're speaking about death. It's something beyond themselves. So is it, what's the author telling us? That, given the trauma that these people have experienced, they don't feel complete in themselves. They can't speak for themselves or as themselves until there's a certain release, and in this case, the release was death.
Wow. Great insight. Thank you for that. That's something I didn't pick up in the book, but I think that's a really powerful writing approach that the author used there. So this is a book that you'd recommend that everyone read as part of learning more about the residential school system, and sort of personally, I found this to be a book that was really challenging to read, but at the end of it, I'm really happy I read it. Would you?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. It's certainly not an introductory piece, but I mean, you dive right in. But it's well worth reading, and it's encouraged me. I actually have a couple of other books that I'm looking forward to reading along the same vein. Fantastic.
Great. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears now. We're going to time travel, if you will, to a different time. And it's a time that takes place around the time of World War II. So earlier than where we meet the characters in Five Little Indians. We're going to talk now about The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. So another book of fiction, as you said, you like history. This is historical fiction. It is about by a real person, Mila Pavlichenko. And I would guess that if you haven't read this book, you probably don't know that name. We do, learn a lot about this person, and I'm going to share a little bit about Mila before we get into some questions for Mayor Ryan. So this book takes place centrally in World War II in the Soviet Union. We meet Mila right before the start of the war. She is a mother. She has a young son. She is separated from her successful surgeon husband, who we know to be a bit of a shady character. She's a history student. She's a librarian, which I can appreciate, and just also happens to be a sharpshooter enthusiast. So by that I mean that she has enrolled herself in a sniper training program, kind of a hobby club, where she learns skills that famously earn her the title of Lady Death. So fast forwarding to 1941, which is when Germany invades the Soviet Union, Mila decides that she's going to put her skills to good use, and she goes down to enroll in the Red Army. Types of jobs or positions available to her at the time for a female would have been, as you expect, nurse and cook, and she was encouraged into those roles. But as a member of the Soviet Union, both men and women were welcome to apply for any position in the Red Army, and so she enlisted in the Rifle Division as a sniper. Kind of progressive. So this book flip-flops really between two time periods during in the war. One is her life as an active sniper, fighting for the Red Army, where she racks up over 300 official kills. And then another time period, also during the war, but where she's not an active member of the Red Army. She is on a press junket, if you will, with the Red Army in America. So she's brought to America as a bit of a spokesperson and advocate, trying to find support for the Americans to enter the war and support on the Soviet front and fight the Nazis. So it's in America that Mila and Eleanor Roosevelt meet and discover that they are kindred spirits, which is really interesting. And there is also, just for some excitement, an assassination plot going on against President Roosevelt. So there's a lot that happens in this book here. Maybe you could start by just telling us, what intrigued you about this book and something that stands out about it.
Well, actually, is the fact that my wife recommended it to me.
There's a theme here. Okay.
and Anne had read the book, and she said, you'd really enjoy this. She knows I like to read, and but she had picked it up first. So that's how it came to me. But it is a fun book to read on one level. It's a great book to read historically. And it identified a couple of things that brought forward a couple of things I didn't know. I don't know a lot, but in this particular book, there were a couple of key points of history that I became familiar with that I had no knowledge of previously. So it's a good book overall, and even the fictional plot to assassinate Franklin Roosevelt, it actually comes out of a real plot to assassinate him just before he was actually sworn in as president. So it's interesting.
That actually was one thing that stood out for me about the book as well. Maybe not the biggest American history buff, I wouldn't call myself, but certainly I think in my head the narrative around Franklin Roosevelt was he walked on water and everybody thought so. And in this book we learned actually there were a number of different forces that were really conspiring against him, especially as he was seeking that last presidency, and there was a whole group that was really fed up with him. Yeah,
I mean the assassination, there was, he was making a speech in Miami, I think it was in '32, just before the transition into the White House, and someone tried to assassinate him, and they missed him and shot the mayor of Miami, who unfortunately died. So that was a real incident. So yeah, there was discontent for sure, and then after he got into office, there was a plot, not too strong a word, to actually overthrow him. There was going to be a coup. And interestingly, and if we think about current events in the United States, what happened on January the 6th, that was led, believe it or not, by the American Legion. and financed through some very high-powered individuals who weren't happy with Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. Thought it would be detrimental to them and the country. So yeah, there's and that was something that I wasn't aware of at all. But you read the book, and Google is fantastic, so you can do a little bit of research, and it's factually there.
Excellent. So Mila is somebody that in the book gets called a hero a lot. That's sort of part of the press that surrounds her as she's going across America, making tons of speeches, advocating really for why America should enter the war and support the Soviets in fighting the Nazis. And yet there's also lots of examples of where she was also a leader. So when you think about the word leader and the word hero, for you, is there something that distinguishes a leader from a hero?
Well, I think there's elements of both in each of the words. But if you take the words individually, hero is a standalone. You're in a place, a point in time, a specific, maybe an extraordinary action, and it's you. So you are ascribed that title, if you will, of a hero. You become a hero. You act as a hero. You are a hero. Leaders, it's a collective, because you can't be a leader if there's nobody to follow. So what do leaders do? Leaders can be heroic, often are. But leaders are influencers. They bring people together for a common cause, and as the word suggests, lead them towards a specific vision, goal, etc. And what leaders do is they have to enable others to participate and accomplish. It's understood that the leader can't do it alone. The leader leads.
Absolutely. And I think that is something then when we talk about Mila, obviously she is a hero because of what she achieved, with her gun and her 300 kills that she racked up and everything. But she had a team really that looked to her as her, to follow her and to be trained by her and to be guided by her. And she had to make snap decisions in really dangerous, obviously, situations in the middle of the war. So I thought that was just one of those kind of themes that we were kind of being guided by the author to think of her as both hero and leader.
Yeah, we think of, excuse me, as snipers, I think for the most part, as individual, it's that person out there alone with their weapon. But if you read the book, Mila was actually part of a team. She created a team of snipers. They worked together cooperatively, in specific situations, sometimes independently, as the situation dictated. But it was very much a part of, bringing a group together towards a common end, ensuring the training, enabling, and then participating with them. Yeah,
and she probably would say that she had a bit more of an uphill battle to climb in terms of leading a group of men, because there weren't any women. It wasn't. She was really the only one, the only female in the group, right?
It's interesting because you said it a few minutes ago. When we first meet her, she is encouraged to be in that traditional female role within the construct of her society. She was. But she decided that she was going to compete, and as she says, she was going to compete with the boys. And she was always striving to be as good as, if not better, and usually better. So she participated in sports, and then as we get into the war, as you said, she was. They actually resisted her going into a combat role. They wanted her in the nurse, as a nurse, or in the kitchen. And as you said, she's overcome that, and that very vividly portrayed in the book.
And one of her catchphrases or slogans was, don't miss, right? It was like there was no room for any kind of a slip up. And I think that to an extent that was both true because she was in the role that she had as a sniper. You don't have that luxury of missing, because then as soon as the bullet misses the target is aware, right, of what's happening. I think though also as a leader, you can find yourself in that feeling that you can't miss. There's like a group of people relying on you and waiting for your guidance. And so I think it works maybe in both settings there as well.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Something that's fun to think about is, if you could talk to Mila, the person, not necessarily the character, who is now present day, she is deceased, but if you could have asked a question of Mila, what would you want to know about her?
Mila and Eleanor Roosevelt formed a friendship, and they truly did. This isn't fictional. As you said, she was part of a youth delegation that wasn't just from the Soviet Union. It was various allied countries that Eleanor Roosevelt brought together to encourage the United States to be more supportive of the Allied efforts and eventually get into the war. They formed a strong friendship. They were both feminists. They were both leaders, and they both took risks. And after the war, Eleanor Roosevelt actually went to the Soviet Union on a visit and insisted on meeting Mila again. It was resisted, but she insisted. It happened. And they actually had to go and find a private place where the handlers weren't listening. So what I'd like to ask Mila is, at the beginning of the book, she's very, at the beginning of her tour with the U.S., where, quite frankly, the U.S. was quite disparaging. Here is a hero who had experienced firsthand war, and they're asking her questions about her makeup and frankly criticizing her dress and it's not being feminine, etc. And she pushes back and she says, "No, in my country, we're equal. Men and women are equal." Well, before she gets to the U.S. and we're hearing her story, they're not equal. They're equal in name. But not in reality. I mean, we've said what she was encouraged to do. She experienced firsthand in battle, sexual advances and expectation from the officer class as to what would happen. So, given again the two different dynamics of the Soviet Union versus the United States, with largely the same attitudes of men towards women, and I'd like to hear her tell us, as she got past the war, the Soviet Union became something else. Yeah. She certainly was able to observe the United States. Her relationship, conversation with Eleanor Roosevelt. What does she really think? Would she feel that women in the Soviet Union, if not and in the United States, what progress have they made in real terms? Yeah. So I think that would be an interesting discussion to have with her.
That's a great question. That is a great question. All right. Don't want to say goodbye to Mila, but I think we'll need to in the interest of time, because we have a real big figure to meet in our next book. So the last book you put forward is The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. I'll do a quick summary here for our listeners. So The Splendid and the Vile is a nonfiction book, and it chronicles Churchill's first year as Prime Minister, which began in May of 1940. This book does an excellent job of putting us in this time period, putting us in the room with Churchill, and a lot of that was achievable because several people in Churchill's inner circle kept really detailed diaries at the time. So this, is a fantastic book in terms of helping you feel like you are there sitting next to Churchill in his first year in power. Was this your first book about Churchill, or is he someone that you've read about before?
No, I think anybody who's done any reading at all about particularly that period of history has read something about Churchill. So no, he wasn't a new individual, a new character. And I think, though, what this book does is it brings some further life, more... It brings more definition to the individual and the individuals around him. And Larson has done a fantastic job of researching it's obvious. But I think what the audience needs to know, if you want to read this book, is that although it's historical fiction, it's closer to history than anything else that I think I've read that isn't pure history. Because every one of the conversations that are in this book are lifted from diaries of the individuals that were having those conversations with Churchill. And I think that's really, I mean, the amount of research that was done to write this book is phenomenal. But we can actually then have a better understanding and take as truth some of the incidents and the emotions that are involved in the conversations and ultimately in the decisions that are made.
Absolutely. Was there something about Churchill that stood out for you, that you learned about him as a person in this book?
No, nothing that really was nothing new. As I said, we were all pretty familiar with Churchill and who he was, what he accomplished. But I think it reinforces the fact that Churchill had this innate sense of conviction, and from that conviction he took courage. It was conviction and courage that propelled him forward. That could come across negatively in many situations, and may well have contributed to maybe a bad decision. But it was very much, I think, the key characteristic of Churchill, and that comes out in the book.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you a bit more of a personal question, because this book is about Churchill and his first year in power. Now, I mean, we've been celebrating you recently in different ways, talking about your legacy as a mayor and elected official at the City of Pickering. I would love to know something about your first year as mayor, and maybe, what were some things that were happening in Pickering when you became mayor? Something that you can share with us that stands out from your first year.
Well, I can say that after being on council for 9 years, going into the mayor's office was still a learning experience. It's different. You're working with people in a different way. You may be the same people, but there's a different dynamic, and you have to learn how to work through that. You suddenly in a different relationship. I mean, I was a councillor. There was the mayor, and he was dealing with the other levels of government. But now I was dealing with the province, I was dealing with the federal government. And the big issue at the time, which was the issue during that election, was the question of growth. Not unlike what it is today. But there was a growth management study that the city of Pickering had just completed. The previous mayor supported that, the results of that study, promoted it right through the election. That was actually against the policy of the party that he was representing and the premier. And so I inherited that. And I continue that. And quite frankly, I don't think I did a very good job of it at the beginning, because I took an aggressive stance, which worked ultimately against, sometimes you don't always win. And then you have to deal with the results of that loss. And it's not just the loss, it's how you lost. So I spent some time repairing relationships with specifically the province as a result of that. And we got through it. We got past it, and the development is occurring. I think it's occurring reasonably well. The specific of the day was the question of the Seton development, and that has come to pass. We're seeing people moving in. The development is progressing. The people are happy, and we're getting the jobs that we had planned for that area. So there was a lot to learn. Some of the lessons difficult, and but it's all part of the process.
Oh, thank you for your candidness. Appreciate that. In both Splendid in the Vial and Diamond Eye, Churchill and Mila, they both have roles to play in advocating to President Roosevelt to join the war. They each do it in sort of different ways. We see Churchill prefers the pen and writing, telegrams, and then also hosting. He's a big sort of, I think he likes to play the host and likes to have American envoys and emissaries come to his country home and wine and dine them. Mila goes on this sort of press tour and talks about why the Americans should join the war, tries to win over American hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about advocacy and being a politician, and sort of what is the importance of advocacy as mayor or as a politician?
Well, advocacy is important in whether you're the mayor or you're someone approaching the mayor, the office. It's the movement of idea. It's the movement of purpose, the presentation of idea and purpose in a way that is going to be receptive, and you have to adapt to the situation and to the individual. I mean, Churchill, he was, well, we all know he was a fantastic orator. Mm-hmm. To be an orator, you first have to be able to put it on a piece of paper. Yeah. So he was a fantastic letter writer as well. So his advocacy was heartfelt. It was honest. He didn't pull any punches. Mm-hmm. He told Roosevelt, if you don't come in, we're lost. Mm. He said the same thing to the French president just before Dunkirk. You cannot give up. Mm-hmm. Now, ultimately, they did. We all know the story of Dunkirk, an heroic story. And eventually Roosevelt came in, but he came in because he was attacked. And would he have come in without the attack? Yeah, I believe he would have, and Roosevelt's advocacy would have been a large part of that. So Mila did it as the situation provided. So I think one of the stories that jumps out in the book is on the tour when I think she was in Chicago, and got another one of those silly questions about her uniform or whatever, mm-hmm. and she finally, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but if I can paraphrase, she looked at the audience and she said, "Gentlemen, this is an army uniform, and I am a woman in battle, and don't you think you've been standing behind me long enough?" So mm-hmm. She got a standing ovation, as I understand, and it was shortly after that, again, as a result of other events, but America did come in. But you can see how someone who is passionate, believes it, is honest about it, and can demonstrate that honesty, is a very strong advocate.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, excellent. As you mentioned, Churchill was a great orator, and many of his speeches, you can read them in books. They publish them. They're so famous. And the speeches that he wrote during the war years are particularly his most famous ones. In modern times, in 2022, are speeches as meaningful for politicians?
Well, first of all, I got to tell you, I actually have CDs at home of Churchill's speeches, wartime speeches, and every once in a while we just listen to him because he's wonderful to listen to. But at any rate, listen, words matter. Words matter. But the speeches themselves, I'm not so sure anymore, because unless it's a 30-second news clip, it's sound bites. Everybody's into sound bites. I think Sesame Street started that trend, didn't they? When they said everything's done in 3 minutes clips because that's what people can actually internalize, can comprehend. And so we've typically gone that way. And I think social media, again, has watered down the effectiveness of a speech. But let me go back to what I said at the beginning. Words matter. So the words that are used, the way they are used, and if you can make short speeches, unlike what I'm doing now, they can have effect, and they do have effect. I'm concerned, quite frankly, with the way discourse is being deteriorated. There's no civility anymore. And I blame social media to a large extent on that. There's an erosion of respect for individual, for institution. And that comes out in the way that the people are, and we used to say parsing, but they're not anymore. They're ripping apart any narrative that doesn't strictly fit to whatever specific thought that they have. So, sorry, I'm not sure that I really answered your question, but
It's like people will read a headline, but they may not read an article. And so how much information can you pack into a headline?
Exactly the point. I mean, Martin Luther King, okay, everybody knows of and has heard the beginning of his "I Have a Dream" speech. It's a wonderful speech. How many people actually know the last 5 lines? To your point, and we could pick other examples. So people grab sound bites. And as I said, the words matter. So, but speeches, not so much.
And maybe long form journalism sort of is in the same kind of camp as well. It's interesting when you get, this is a bit of a totally a tangent, if you will, but when you're starting to look at one scientific study that came out on what's the effect of having 2 cups of coffee a day, you can look at different media outlets and see that half of them say 2 cups of coffee is great, it prevents Alzheimer's. 2 cups a day causes Alzheimer's, and the interpretation of the article or the research is so different. And then the best journalism is really when they say, actually, it's neither, it's nuanced. So it's not this and it's not that, but there's some gray in it.
That's great. Yeah.
Right? And so, and so I wonder, would Churchill be an effective politician today? Would he have enough, would he get enough airtime? Would he get the sort of the bandwidth that he got during the war?
Well, I think he would, because he had that personality, that forceful personality, and he was intentionally provocative. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for that provocation. They're looking for a galvanizing incident moment. Sentence that they can key on, and then spin that off into how many 500,000 likes.
Right, you're right. And when you were saying that words matter, I think he was just like he picked perfect words. Like there could be 5 words that would have done the job, but the one he picked was even better than any of those 5. They just carried such meaning. Okay, so. It seems like leading during a crisis, like Churchill did in this book, would be different than in times of not crisis or usual times. Is there anything that speaks to you about leading during a crisis that resonated for you in Churchill as a leader during a crisis, experiences you had as mayor and challenging times?
Well, I think it would be a huge overreach of me to try to describe anything I've experienced to what Churchill was experiencing in terms of crisis. But certainly we've had difficult situations in the city. I think maybe the most recent one would be the false alarm at the Pickering nuclear station. Also rather apropos to, we're doing this today when they made the announcement that they're going to extend the life of the Pickering nuclear station for at least until 2026, and they're going to look at refurbishment beyond that. So the incident you may recall is that there was a false alert put out that there had been a major incident at the nuclear station. Well, you can imagine what was going on in our community, and rightfully. Let me reinforce, it was a false alarm. It was a mistake that was made by an operator that was testing the alarm system. And instead of pushing the test button, he pushed the live button. It was as simple as that. So there was, 24 hours of real concern in the community, even, as much as you were asking me about speeches and words matter and how do you get the message out. We did everything that we could. I was on the front line of that. being the face of the city, which is what you're supposed to do. And for all of that, for days after that, we were still getting people calling and saying, well, really, what's going on? Yeah. So you need to be upfront, you need to be honest, and you need to be confident in what it is that you're saying. And so I think I did that, and we got through it. And today we have a community that is still confident, I believe, generally, in the safety of the plant, and pleased that our contribution to the electricity solution for the province.
Yeah, yeah, excellent, great example. So, with the years you were in municipal politics, is there a piece of advice that you would be sure that anyone entering an elected office knows, based on your experience?
Maybe some of the obvious. I mean, you have to listen. People are looking to people in elected office to be leaders. And they say to you, we want you to be a leader, just as long as you follow what we say. There's a bit of a dichotomy there. You have to be able to listen to those voices, all of those voices, and try and find that middle road. And sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes there is no middle. You just have to say, no, this is what I believe is what I'm hearing for the best. And that's the direction that you're going to go. You have to be strong enough to withstand the criticism for that. And the other piece that I would leave is that, and I think Churchill was a good example of this. You share the successes, but you accept responsibility when it's not so good.
Yeah.
And he certainly did that. There's many examples you can find in the book, and if you read enough of history that Churchill was involved in, you can see he does that. Share the success, accept responsibility for what didn't go quite so well.
Wonderful. Those are all the questions that I had for you today. You just seem like such a natural at this. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to have you take my seat sometime and you could interview somebody.
Well, thank you for that.
But Mayor Ryan, it was just such a pleasure to talk with you about books. Obviously, it's great when you have someone in a leadership role who is interested in understanding other people's experiences through what they read, also showing yourself just to be someone who's curious about the world and wanting to know more and understand more. So I'm just so honored that you chose to join us today for this first podcast. You're welcome back anytime. Based on how much you read, I'm sure you could do this like on a weekly basis and bring 3 new books. So let us catch up. But it really was such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'll look forward to the rest of the series. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.